I'd like to show you a couple techniques that don't take very much time at all. It's quick and simple. We're going to do a sky replacement and do some selective colors. So let's get started. I have this open in Photoshop right now, but you could do most of this work in Lightroom. The reason it's in Photoshop is because one of the processes I wanted to do and show in this particular tutorial is how you can do a sky replacement on this. So let's start with that. So I have my image open and I thought it's a lovely picture, but I wanted to see what it would look like with a more intense, impressive sky. So I wanted to try doing a sky replacement. So let's go into Photoshop here. We're going to go to Edit, get the drop down, go down to Sky Replacement. And let me pull over this little window that opened. So a window will open, and I happen to be experimenting with this picture already, and so this sky replacement sky was in the replacement window, so it is already loaded. However, if you want more options, you just click this little arrow and you can add your own options, or you can use one that's loaded in in Photoshop. And you will see this is one of the skies that is under Spectacular that comes with Photoshop, so it wasn't my own that I'm using, but I've put it in place. Once you have it in place, all we have to do is get rid of this screen, is to click somewhere else on the window. And now we want to adjust how it's situated in the image. And so a lot of times I will look at this fade edge. Shift edge, I'm going to move it so you can see, and I'm going to move it to the dramatic so you can see, watch the picture and see what happens. If I pull it all the way to the left, you can see it's shifting the edge of where the sky, the new sky, starts, and it's letting through some of the old sky. If I shift it to the plus 100, it's going to come in on the building in this situation. So it's going to start looking for areas that it may need to go inside of the non-sky area. So let's go back to 0 and let's look at what fade edge does. So if I pull it all the way to 100, plus 100, you will see what it's doing is it's taking this area and fading it from the new sky into the old sky. So you're seeing a little bit of a fade area. So it helps it blend in, and then sometimes that may be necessary. In this case, it really isn't. And I usually pull the fade edge all the way down because I want the new sky to be right at, particularly this has very sharp defined edges, so I want to bring it all the way to the building. So I really don't need that to fade gently into the area around where the sky is meeting. So I'm going to pull mine back to 0, and I'm going to leave the shift at 0. If I needed to darken or lighten the sky, I could do it here. Again, in this situation, I'm happy with just setting at 0. So let's bring that back. But sometimes you do need to match the sky with the existing foreground that you're putting it on. And so that's when you may want to mess with brightness and or color. In this case, we don't need to worry about the color because we're going to desaturate everything anyway. So this gray will work fine. If you need to up your scale, you need more sky so you can maneuver it around, you would then pull your scaling up to the right. It will grow larger. In this case, I thought being down at 100 was just fine. 100 fills the frame. I can't land on 100, so 101 is good. If to match your background or your original picture, you need to flip the sky so the lighting's coming from the same direction, you can flip it, or maybe it just looks better. Then you can go ahead and flip it and it just reverses it. In this case, doesn't make that much difference. And this multiply is how this is applied to the thing. It could be screen, which will lighten everything in the foreground. In this case, multiply it, it makes it dark, keeps it dark. And you can adjust the lighting of the actual picture to maybe more match the sky, so you can play with these. And now my output is either going to be in new layers, so I can see all the masks that it used to put the sky on the picture and not cover up the existing picture. Or you can just have a duplicate layer where you don't see the layers that were involved in the process. You just see a picture layer coming in that has the new sky. I tend to sometimes dig into those layers, so I'm going to leave it new layers, but you could do either. And once you get it ready, you can say okay. So now we have a new sky, and you can see over here on the left, you'll see all the layers that were used to produce this new sky into this image to look the way it does. I'm going to go ahead and close that up. And so I want to now make a picture that combines the new sky with the existing image, which had I done duplicate in the sky replacement software before I closed out of it, I would have had just the duplicate layer, and so I'd been ready to go, but I wanted those layers in case I wanted to mess with them. So I'm going to group these two together into a visible stamp layer, and to do that I'm going to select the top line, and then I'm going to do a Shift, Option or Alt, Command E, and you'll see it put together. You can see over here in the layers panel, it put together these two. So if I turn them off, you can still see the same exact picture. All right, so now I wanted to show you the select color thing that I wanted to do. And one of the easiest ways, since I'm in Photoshop now, I'm going to go into Adobe Camera Raw, which is very, very similar to Lightroom. However, this is not my normal workflow, so it may not be for you either. I started out in Photoshop because this is not my image, and I wanted to just bring it into Photoshop, not worry about putting it in Lightroom. But my normal workflow for my own work would be Lightroom. I would have then processed the foreground the way I wanted, but Jen has already processed it and it looked good. And so I would have then taken it into Photoshop, which is where I am now, done the sky replacement. Then I would have saved it, and it would taken it back to Lightroom, where I would have continued the edit that I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to do mine in Adobe Camera Raw here in Photoshop, but the exact same thing could be done over in Lightroom Classic. So let's look at what I want to do now. I want to turn the entire picture black and white with the exception of the lighthouse itself. So to do that, I'm going to go up in this particular case, since I'm in Photoshop, I'm going to go up to Filter, and then I'm going to go down to Camera Raw Filter. I'm going to open that, and it brings up another screen, which I'm on a double screen here, so I'm going to slide that over so you can see it. And so I have this as my option. So now I want to go into the masking panel. I'm going to click on that. And I want to turn the background of this black and white. So I want to desaturate it. How do I arrive at that? Well, let's try just doing a background selection and see what it gives us. And you can see here in red is what Camera Raw thought was, it's in the red, it's what it thought was the background. And I think it's pretty accurate. It's really kind of hard to tell if it's selected any of the red building because my overlay color is red. So let's just change the overlay color to blue. We'll try a blue and say okay. And that way we'll be able to maybe distinguish better what it has thought was the background and what wasn't. So in this case, I think it's pretty good. And we could go ahead and work with it as it is. And if we find out that we want these rocks that haven't been selected, we want those to also be desaturated, I can add that later. So let's go ahead and process it as it is. And so I'm going to go over to my effects area and I'm going to scroll down until I find saturation, which is right here, and I'm going to pull it to the left. And you will notice it's taking the color out of all of the areas that were selected when I did the background selection. And I can go all the way to 100 minus, but maybe a little bit before that. Gives it just a tinge of color, not a whole lot, but it's not quite as harsh. And now when I look at it, I need to decide, do I still want this to be color or do I want it to be desaturated? I think I will choose to desaturate it, which is what I did for my example. So what I need to do is I need to add to the selection that we had made for the background. So I'm going to click add and I'm going to just color it in with a brush. So I'll click brush and I'm going to brush in the area that I didn't want this color to be in. And I think I will go ahead and leave it up in this area, leave the color there. So I'm just taking it off the rocks. And I believe sometimes you'll look at this picture and you won't even realize it's had the color selection as its, I guess, description. You will think maybe it was a color, just a very flat gray day. So we're going to go with that. And at this point, I would say, now what else do I want to do while I'm in here? And I think what I would like to do is go ahead and add a vignette. So I'm going to create a new mask and I'm going to use a radial filter and I'm going to draw that down. Now for vignettes, I find that it's easier to zoom out a little bit and then draw out my oval. And now I'm going to reposition by clicking on that center dot, pulling it down where I want it. And if I did any adjustments right now, it'd be doing it to the inside of the oval that I pulled out. I want to do it to the outside because it's a vignette. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on this, which will invert it. And now I'm going to drop down my exposure and I want to make this kind of moody. So I'm going to really pull it down. And I think my vignette oval is too large. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and click on one of these outer dots so that I can get both directions to pull in at the same time. I'm just going to pull it in a little bit. Now I don't want it to darken down the lighthouse at all. So I could do a couple things. One would be I could go in and remove the area so I could subtract from this. I could go over here and hit subtract and select brush and then paint it off of the building. Or in my case, I think I'm going to try going up and creating a new mask. So I'll click on that. Let's do another radial filter. I'm going to draw it down over the center of the lighthouse. And I'm just going to lighten up. And it's going to lighten up even inside this clouds and the water. It's just going to add a little bit of lightness, maybe, you know, not even, I don't want to lose anything detail wise, so maybe just a quarter of a stop. And I'm going to come up here and turn it off and on and see if I like what happened. So there's without it and here's with it. I think I'm going to leave it that way. If you didn't like what I just did, then don't do it. But at this point, I think I'm done with doing this. So I'm going to take this back into Photoshop by clicking OK. And it saved it into this layer. Now, one thing to notice, if you go into Camera Raw filter, it will put it on the layer you're on. If you want the ability to maybe mask out portions of it, you may want to make a copy prior to going into Camera Raw. So you'll have your original, and then on top of that, you'll have your adjusted Camera Raw layer. And so you can decide if you want to paint something in or out. So this is the image that I have come up with that easily. Let's turn on the original. So this is where it was before. This is where it is now. And I don't think that the building got a whole lot brighter when I did that inner light spotlight that I added on there. I think what it just did is kind of counteracted the vignette that was feathered into that area. If you look again, as I turn it off and on, you'll notice it's on. Now watch the building. It doesn't seem to change much. And here's before and after. Just a moody picture with a few easy steps. It took longer to explain it than it will to do it. So I hope you go out and give it a try. Get creative. Bye now.